Now, this board is really good for us. We're going to 4-bet queens and jacks every single time. We can even 4-bet hands like ace-queen, and obviously aces, kings. So we're doing quite well here. Eight-five deuce is a pretty innocent-looking board. I mean, it is a rainbow board. It's a little bit connected, but not super connected. So we can still bet this board pretty aggressively. I mean, we're afraid of a couple of 2 pairs, a couple of sets, but that's about it. He can have hands like nines, whatever. Going with a range 1/3 sizing is probably a little bit too, well, I wouldn't use the word passive, but you probably can size up here. Versus this small check raise, there's no way we can fold. We beat all of his bluffs, like, 6-7, 9-7, Jack 10. We have a gut shot. We have a backdoor flush draw. We have an overcard, which is often live, so we definitely cannot fold here. Meanwhile, ace-6 we can fold. Deuce is not that bad of a card for us. It's less likely villain has like 5 deuce or deuces now. His draws didn't improve, so he very quickly checks. I'm not sure what that means. That could be a trap, right? He could have 5s and be slipping it to you. But he could also just have Jack 10 and be like, I'm not going to fake tank and pretend to have the nuts. I'm just going to check. So it's not the worst hand to stab on the turn and then, maybe turn into a bluff. Queen is not a bad card for you. I mean, you are probably going to bet call ace-queen here sometimes, for sure. And even some other hands like queen-jack suited, whatnot. So when he quickly checks, I think probably checking behind is just fine. If he had something like an 8, I think he's probably not folding to a bet anyway. And, you beat all of his bluffs. Unless he has exactly that type of bluff. It's actually not even that bad of a play by him. But obviously, if you start check raising a lot of ace high, king high, queen high, random hands, you can be overdoing it. King 8, once again, it is a pretty loose open, but against somebody who may be a little bit weaker in the big blind, it's fine. I'd like to see a slightly smaller open raise size here, given that this player doesn't have a full stack. And this board is similar to the last one, 8-5 deuce. I mean, the board is not similar, but the situation is similar. If you just bet range 1/3, that would be okay. But if you were to plug this into a solver, it wouldn't tell you to bet range 1/3. It would probably tell you to mix it up a little bit. Now, it is still a board where we get to be aggressive. I mean, we have king 6 suited, king 5 suited, 6-5 suited, king 6s, 5s. We have all the aces and queens. We have all the good stuff. But villain is going to hit this board a decent amount himself. So this is one of those 2 street value hands. So you check behind. The more aggressive you think he is with, turn probes and river probes, the more you want to check here. And this hand is really nice to bet the turn. Obviously, you've got top pair, you've got an okay kicker, and you block the straight, right? So if villain were to check raise, this hand is much better to call down with than a hand like, ace-king. Ace-king is a better hand than king 8, but you don't block any nutted hands. So I like the fact that you delay c-bet here. So 9-8 is an easy open raise if given the opportunity. I mean, so the big blind, you don't have a mark on him yet. He doesn't have a full stack, so there's a decent chance he's a little bit weaker than you, so you can play a few more hands. Doesn't mean you just get to play terrible hands. I mean, you're still out of position, and you're still facing somebody who's got 2 cards, but it's a little bit more attractive. Deuces, it's a nice calling spot. If you miss, you can easily fold, and if you hit, you're probably going to win a big pot against potentially 2 recreationals. Here with ace-king, I'd probably play 3-better fold. I think this sizing is fine. So this board should be going check, check, check a decent amount. Leading is an option, but I probably would just end up checking. When Mr. Mahoon checked behind, I don't think he has a very strong range. So he could have improved to hand like 10-9 or hand like ace-10. But if he had an overpair, I think he would bet the majority of the time. So you could try and check raise against him, but I'd probably end up betting myself here. On the 10 here, probably I think a big bet is a fine play. You're going to have 3-4 suited here. You're going to have deuces. You're going to have 6s. You're going to have 5s. You're going to have some hands like 6-5 suited here, which you could also squeeze. And so we're facing somebody who could be a recreational player. We have to keep that in mind. Recreational players tend to not like the full button as much. So I would definitely go ahead and bet here. Your hand is a bit strong for a check call, especially against a recreational player. At the same time, it's a little bit, it's a little bit too weak to check raise, right? If the river were just a 7, you could consider check raising. If you believe the villain is going to bet his 10 a lot, and then perhaps bet call. So this is definitely a thin value bet. Villain is going to call a lot of flush draws that improve. But at the same time, I think he will call a lot of hands like a 10 as well. If he showed me a 10, I would still make that bet for sure. I would expect him to call. So here, I would definitely go ahead and isolate. I'd probably go for a little bit of a smaller sizing. But if you say, hey, this guy is crazy, he doesn't fold to anything, he doesn't care how big you make it, he calls any hand, then sure, go ahead and make it bigger. So this guy we just beat with the deuces. I would say go ahead and 4-bet here. You're going to isolate this guy, not that wide, but definitely not with the nuts or nothing. So Mr. McCoon should be playing back a decent amount. So I think 4-betting here is the best play, and then obviously calling it off. I wouldn't... I think we can still have a 4-betting range here. We absolutely need a 4-bet range. A 4-bet which is not an all-in. But I do think we get to use this sizing as well. Meanwhile, aces, I would just always 4-bet. When villain goes for this min 3-bet, it looks to me like he's trying to buy the pot with hands like ace-jack, as in he doesn't want to call, he doesn't want to 3-bet large, so he just goes small. And sometimes he can have 5-4 off, and sometimes he can have aces as well, and he was trapping you, right? I think it's happened to all of us, where we raise here with kings, and he snap shoves and has aces. Definitely possible, but we have aces here. Okay, probably would have gone a tiny bit larger, because now we still have an SPR of, 2.5. I wouldn't actually mind if you ended up checking here. I think villain has a decent amount of suited hands that make a flush, and you don't really need protection. And if he has a hand like, some kind of stupid hand like king 10 off with no diamond, it's okay if you let him improve. Anyway, we end up betting, so in theory, I think a check makes a lot of sense. But, if you say, hey, this guy's a drooler, I'm just going to milk him, that's fine. King is a really good card for us, not so much for him, so I don't think he's going to make a ton of moves here. Probably just go ahead and bet the turn. If he shoves, we have to call it off. We're not super happy about it, but I think we got to. Villain could just be shoving a hand like ace-king, right? So when he calls his 4-bet and quickly calls twice, it looks to me like he has a hand like, for instance, pocket 10s here, as in, this snap call usually means like, hey, I'm strong, I'm snap calling, like I'm not even thinking about it, but it's one of those fake snap calls, right? Trying to look strong. And yeah, sometimes at high stakes there's a metagame where they pretend to do that, and they actually do have the nuts, and then they don't have it anymore, and then they do it by accident. It's hard to really read into it, other than against potentially recreational players. And here on the river, we block hands like ace-queen that would maybe bluff, so with the ace of diamonds, so I would just go ahead and shove. And yes, we can lose. But I think our hand is good enough to shove here for about 80% pot. Oh. Okay, so he was trapping pre-flop, I guess. So that's just a bad beat. I wouldn't expect to lose to a hand like that very often. More likely, like a flush or like pocket 8s or something. Yeah, you just got unlucky. Jack 8 here, I think, is a fold. He raised pretty large. The rake is quite high. Most of your opponents are on the nittier side. Yeah, that's not a call. That is definitely a fold pre-flop. Even at, let's say, 500 zoom, I would fold this hand. At high stakes, it's close, but with NL50 rake, it's a very clear fold. Easy call on the flop, although I would have taken my time a little bit more. And this is not a card that villain is going to bet on a lot. You're going to have a lot of 7s, right? You're going to call with hands like 5-7 on the flop, whatnot. And on the river, we can split here, obviously, so you have to think, who's got more 9s in his range, right? You can have 9-8 suited, maybe offsuit even, apparently. You can have 9-6 suited, 9-5. You could have some kind of hand like ace-9, king-9. So I think you have a lot more 9s than your opponent. So I think you can actually lead quite large here. try to get him off a split. Now, if let's say an ace made a straight, well, an ace he will have all the time, right? So you can't really bluff too aggressively. I mean, an ace, a king, a queen, he should hit those cards a lot. But on a board like this, I don't think he hits the 9 a ton. He's going to have it sometimes. Meanwhile, 8-4 suited is a way easier call than this Jack-8. This is a pretty clear call, unless the rake is ridiculous. But yeah, way easier call than Jack-8. We flopped the worst draw in history. I'd also recommend that you set up you don't get tournament warnings. And here versus third pot, I don't think we can fold. We have a mediocre draw. We don't have a backdoor flush draw. But versus range 1/3, most likely we can fold here. I mean, it's close. It's not a great spot, but at the same time, I do think we can go ahead and just play our hand there. Mostly as just a check call and then check fold later streets. And occasionally even as a check raise. So I don't mind the fact that you're making some tighter folds against nittier opponents potentially, but most people just bet their whole range anyway. It's not a spot where people are mixing it up that much. I like the fact that you're marking people, so you can potentially adjust against them. This is kind of awkward because you get squeezed here. The problem with King 10 suited is that your hand is quite dominated. You know, Diafall is going to squeeze a lot of hands like King Queen suited, Ace King, whatnot. And we should thank the button for making it easy. Don Juan, thank you. Looks like we defend the Queen 7 suited multi-way, which is fine. And obviously, this ace is not a good card for us. This is not a very good play by our opponent, but easy fold. All right, let's do these aces. I'm excited. So we ISO raise Jack 4 offsuit. Now, does this happen sometimes? Sure, but the thing is, you're doing this against a recreational player, right? And most recreational players don't really limp fold. So you're voluntarily putting in money with a very bad hand. And normally, having fold equity helps, but here, I don't think you have a whole lot of fold equity. So unless you have a note that, let's say, he just limp folds a lot, he's very bad and nitty, then fine. But I don't think you have that note. Maybe you say, hey, you know, I want, excuse me. Maybe I want to raise this hand like 10, 20% of the time, and you use an RNG or whatnot, but you didn't do any of that. So be careful raising too many trashy hands against people who are not going to limp fold much. Meanwhile, aces, let's raise. That was very anticlimactic. So, I mean, if you end up with a ton of shitty hands like these, you know, Jack 4 off, 10-3 off, then, you know, betting every single time on a board like this is going to be problematic, right? Your blockers are also not particularly good. You block Ace Jack, which villain likely doesn't have very often. So, I guess you block Ace 4, but that's about it. So, yeah, it's very easy to overdo this. So, you can do it sometimes, you know, bluff raise these trashy hands, but be careful not to overdo it. Hey, MMA, in your video, in your run-on-ones video where Phil Galfond reviewed your footage like 6 years ago, you said you tilted off your roll twice. I've also tilted off my roll twice. Do you have any tips to overcome tilt at the table? My main problem back then was bankroll management. You know, I got so stressed because I knew that losing a few binds would really impact my bankroll. So, you know, just taking it easy and, you know, playing with good bankroll management is going to help a lot. And also just experience and getting older are going to help you a lot. Ace Jack is obviously an easy open raise, and 3-4 easy fold. Suited, we could call, but there is a big difference between 3-4 suited and 3-4 offsuit. And we get another one of these funny flops where, you know, just betting range small is going to be a little bit aggressive, but at the same time, the board is not that bad for you, right? I mean, villain is going to have all the sets, and he's going to have Ace 4 off and 6-4 suited, I would imagine. But then again, that's the only stuff he hits. So a hand like Ace Jack is kind of close. I mean, you've got Ace High, obviously. You've got basically the nut Ace High because villain should be 3-betting Ace Queen. So you have the nut no pair, and you could check behind, which is fine. Now in the deuce, we can delay c-bet quite aggressively. Villain should not really have many deuces, right? When he bets around 70% pot, a little bit less, easy call, I would say. You unblock a lot of his bluffs, like 6-7, clubs, whatnot. You still have the best hand a lot. Meanwhile, probably 3-bet a little bit smaller with the ace-queen. And the 5 is, it's not a great card, but it's a fine card. It's not less likely that villain has a 5, and you still unblock all of his air. So now, it's kind of annoying, right? It is kind of annoying. Your hand is not the worst for calling. You have ace high, which is helpful. I'm not sure villain would bet a hand like a 3 like this. He could have hands like pocket 7s, whatnot. That does hurt you a little bit. I think this is quite opponent dependent. It's very, very close. Let's see what you do. I predict you're going to fold. And he has 9-8. That is one of the reasons to call. As I said, it's very, very close. You do a great job of, blocking couple of 5x, blocking some deuce x, blocking the straight. You don't block any of the cards that he's bluffing with. 8-7, we could play at a very low frequency, but a fold is definitely the standard play. And, queen 6, I don't think we got to talk about. And we're raising ace deuce against Megan. Is that Meghan Markle? I think it is, right? Yeah. This is quite annoying, right? On the one hand, you have a suited ace blind versus blind, but on the other hand, you do have a deuce in your hand. So this hand we can do all 3 things with. I think folding is generally, the weakest option. I think 4-bet bluffing is okay. I think calling is okay. If you believe your opponent is, extremely nitty, then calling is going to be the worst play easily. But unfortunately, we don't really know much about this player. So 27, 21, 14, so that's quite aggressive. But then again, it looks like it's 101 hands, right? So over 101 hands is really tough to make a lot of reads. Now, if over 101 hands, Miss Markle played 80% of them, well, okay, fair enough. That then she must be loose, right? Maybe not 80% loose, but quite loose. But playing quite loose over 100 hands with 27 VPIP doesn't really mean much. Now, this board is really good for us. We're going to 4-bet queens and jacks every single time. We can even 4-bet hands like ace-queen, and obviously aces, kings. So we're doing quite well here. This hand is, it's kind of awkward, right? Having a deuce in your hand. King 7, meanwhile, very, very easy fold. Yeah, you're making some very basic pre-flop mistakes, some major ones, in fact. You called King 7 off against a 3x raise. That's unfortunately a gigantic mistake. So you were considering folding hands like 8-4, but calling hands like these. So what seems to be happening is that you're overvaluing these types of dominated offsuit hands, but you're maybe undervaluing these suited connector hands, which play much better. With ace deuce, well, let's see what we can do here. So your hand is not the worst to turn into a bluff. We block ace queen. Blocking deuces, I don't think matters, right? Like, who the hell 4-bet call, like 3-bet calls deuces blind versus blind? I think I've seen it before. I think I saw a Razor do it once, but I think it's very unlikely. So, your hand is not the worst to just ship all in. That would be a bit of a spastic play, but it wouldn't be the worst play, right? You block ace queen, and if villain calls it off with king 10 of clubs, that's awesome. You're gonna be ahead by a little bit. You also block hands like ace jack here. It's just more likely villain has 9-8 or king 9, stuff like that, or jack 10, which you'll fold. So I actually think that you can turn this hand into a bluff. You can both bet like small, like something around 15 to 20 blinds, or you can actually overbet shove here. Quite surprising that villain checks behind on the 5-5-5. When there's 3 5s out there, quads is quite unlikely. And yeah, I think we should have bluffed here. If villain has a hand like pocket 8s, I think he's probably going to fold. If he has a jack, there's a good chance he folds. If he has a draw, well, we're technically ahead. But this, what are you going to do now, right? Imagine villain shoves. Are you going to call? Probably not. If he bets 15 or 20 or 30 blinds, are you going to call or ship? Probably not, right? And this river is actually, again, pretty good for us. I imagine that if we check this hand, we're also going to check some hands like maybe like king jack offsuit, or like a hand like ace king, or maybe we even check the hand like kings or queens to try and trap him. So I actually wouldn't mind if you ended up bluffing here. You don't really have that much showdown value, right? Unless villain has like pocket 1.5s, which I don't think exists in No Limit Hold'em, you don't really win here. I mean, what do you beat? You beat like 8-9 of diamonds, even ace-10 got there. You know, obviously hand like king-jack got there. I don't really see you having much showdown value, so having the ace is not the worst card ever. I would probably go ahead and bluff here. Having no clubs obviously hurts you a tiny bit, but not so much. Also, one thing here, remember we're playing NL50, right? And a lot of these players are probably a little bit nitty and scared. So if you attack these guys, I do think they'll I do think that these guys will end up overfolding. So, I mean, Villain ended up having ace-queen here, and I think that shows that this hand would have been a decent bluffing candidate because you blocked it, right? And yeah, just because you block something doesn't mean that it's impossible for Villain to have it, because he just did, but it's less likely. Sevens here versus such a small bet, you're beating worse pairs. Obviously, blocking some bluffs does suck, but when Villain bets so small, he can have worse hands easily. And you can still turn this hand into a bluff. So yeah, I think overall you're giving up too many of these medium-sized pots by showing very little aggression. Also, in a lot of other spots, you're trying to check it down, always looking for showdown value, and you're not really attacking much. So I imagine that we have to work on your red line skills. Obviously, having a good red line by itself is not necessarily a good thing, right? In the end, the only thing that matters is the green line, the winnings. But having a good-looking red line does generally attribute to a good-looking green line. There's guys out there who are winning huge red line. So in case you don't know what that means, having a winning red line means you win more without going to showdown than you lose, which generally means high aggression. You know, if you bluff a lot, let's say on the turn, then your opponent's going to do a lot of folding, and then you win the hand without showdown, right?